the Blackwater Massacre episode that we were talking about earlier.
Can you tell people who haven't heard of that before, who are listening right now, what that was, and then how you had in these guys and kind of the background? I'd love to dig into that.
Well, let me think of a shorter explanation. But so I believe it was 2007, Baghdad, Nassour Square. There was a big shootout. I can't remember how many people died.
17, I think.
Was it 17?
I think it was. We'll check that.
But the media, all of the media, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter, none of the media gave these guys a fair shake, and there was a narrative against them, which I didn't realize actually until I started digging into that interview.
And who were these guys?
These guys were Blackwater contractors for the State Department.
They're there basically in a military setting, protecting people.
Okay, so let's go back.
Yeah.
Okay, so Blackwater, back in the early 2000s up to maybe 2015-ish, is kind of, they started going down after 2007. But Blackwater was hired by the U.S. government to protect this particular contract for the State Department was to protect State Department officials in combat zones. So Baghdad, all over Iraq, all over Afghanistan, various other countries in the world. But they would protect State Department officials and diplomats. And they are the only company that never, ever lost a principal being the person being protected. So that's how Blackwater, that's what the State Department contract at Blackwater was. These guys were on the State Department contract. They got in a shootout. Terrorists initiated it. And because of political reasons, they basically got rolled over.
As soon as we came to a stop, within a minute or less, I started hearing the pings on the side of my vehicle. And at the same time, I don't know if I heard Paul yell it out on the radio or just yell it out down the turret that there was a white Kia that was presenting a threat and it was coming towards the vehicle. So
4 Americans received lengthy prison sentences today for an infamous incident during the Iraq War. All 4 are former Blackwater security contractors convicted in the killings of 14 unarmed Iraqis, including women and children, in Baghdad in 2007.
And it took years, though, too. I mean, they weren't even, if I remember correctly, because I will say I just listened to that podcast last week, and you changed my mind on it. It was a podcast I'd avoided for a long time because the narrative was what it was, and it just seems so strong against them that I'm like, oh, God, because I've heard you talk about it after that, like, oh, these guys didn't do anything. I'm like, are we sure about that? But I'm glad I listened because basically it seems to me like the State Department, or I should say the government at that point, had gotten to a point 2 years later where they're like, all right, we're not doing this. Dropped it. And then there was, I guess, like a gaffe, like Biden said something offhand when he was vice president. And then they felt like about like, oh yeah, now we're going to look at that. And then they felt like they had to look at it. And then they didn't charge these guys again until it was like, what, 4 or 5 years out from the event itself?
They went to court 3 times, if I remember correctly. They were not going to get away. They were going to keep indicting them, keep charging them until they got them, and they did. They did. And I mean, we don't have to go into everything, but you saw all the evidence that was hidden, deleted, especially the drone footage. You know, do you remember that part?
Where she was saying that the reporter who you had in there, she was saying something about there's like 7 to 10 minutes where it's like they show up, there was drone footage above, and then it's gone, and you only see when they're leaving.
Yep. And they said, they when they were asked about it, they said, we routinely delete drone footage to conserve memory. But you don't delete a 10-minute piece of drone footage and then it just picks back up. You don't do that. You know, they deleted the evidence. They steamrolled them.
How do you feel when you find out, get to the bottom of the evidence and see something like that when, in this case, a country that you love, America, that you're from, that you fought for at the highest levels, served in the military, served in the CIA. You know, you've been around the block with some of the most powerful parts of the government. How do you feel when you see something like that happen? Does that make you lose faith in the system in its entirety, or do you view that as sometimes these horrible things happen, and when they do, we need to point them out?
I lose faith in the system. I've seen too many of them happen. That particular interview, I mean, some of these interviews get to me. You know, you listen to them, at least you listen to a couple of them, and we get deep, and it's, yeah, I lose faith. I realize politicians are political prostitutes.
Yes.
And they will stop at nothing to get what they want. And that's what that was. There were oil deals involved. There was a status of forces agreement that needed to be re-signed. And to just to know that there are people out there. I mean, these guys are, you watch the interview, these are just red-blooded Americans that wanted to defend the country and fight for the country and protect U.S. dignitaries. And they did a phenomenal job doing that. Like I said, Blackwater has never lost a principle, ever. And to throw these guys, 3 of them were going to prison for what, 30-something years. One of them, Nick Slatton, was going to prison for life
Without parole.
How the f*** do these people sleep at night?
Yeah.
And how the f*** are they still in? How is one of them the president of the United States now? You know? Yeah, it gets to me. It really gets to me.
Well, it's a career, you know? That's the problem. If I could sum it all up in one judgment, the problem with Washington is that it's a career. And that's not just the politicians. I mean, look at K Street. Look at the I mean, I'm not a Trump guy at all, but I will give him this. When he termed that thing the swamp, I mean, that was pretty spot on. I don't know if he came up with that or someone else did, but props, because to me, that's exactly what it is. And I think a part of it, just trying to look at it from the outside, is people will do things when they don't have to see it. You know, and you could probably relate to this when you hear people like me or anyone out there give opinions on the military or stuff like that. There has to be a party that's like, well, you haven't fucking been there, right? But at the same,
that's a big part of me.
Think of that same psychology, though, with these politicians. Like, yes, there are some straight up evil politicians. I'd say a lot of them are. But they make these choices behind a desk when they got 5 fucking staffers outside who are then going to go tell some other guy to do something, and tell some other guy, and eventually someone goes to prison at the end of that loop. There's no personal facing it with accountability right there. They're not like standing next to those guys' prison cells and look them in the eyes and saying, you deserve to be in here. You know, there's a piece that gets lost, and then tragedy, or even corruption in this case, I would call it, happens. Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.